Hey guys, so I'm quite interested in politics. I'm always out to vote in every election I can, and I've noticed that there are plenty of videos on YouTube about US politics, but very few, if any, of my own country of Australia. And so I'm going to try and create a video series going over the history of my country's politics, from Federation through to today, as I attempt to cover all 45 current elections, plus any more that come up. For these videos, I'll predominantly focus on the Australian House of Representatives, or the lower house, as this is where the governing party is decided. I will cover the lead up to the election, including major parties running, as well as any events of notice which likely affected the election. I will then announce who won and by how much. And with that, let's go back over 100 years to the very first federal Australian election. On the 1st of January 1901, the 6 colonies of Australia were united under one nation. New Zealand and Fiji were also invited to join, but New Zealand said no, and Fiji didn't even reply. Despite Federation set to happen on the 1st of January, the first election wasn't set until the 29th of March, so the newly appointed Governor-General, Australia's unelected equivalent of a president, John Ardern Lewis Hope, the 7th Earl of Hopton, had to choose a Prime Minister to run the temporary government until the election. Despite previously being the governor of Victoria, Hopton had been living in Britain during the Federation period and had very little knowledge of the political scene, and decided to go with a Canadian model of federation, which saw the Premier of the most populated state take the role of Prime Minister. This turned out to be New South Wales Premier Sir William Lyne. This was a highly controversial choice though, as Lyne had only recently become Premier and lacked experience in governing. Also, he had been a strong opposition figure to the Federation movement until very recently. As a result, Lyne could not get the support and did not take on the role as Prime Minister. This event became known as the Hopton blunder. Instead, the role was given to Edmund Barton, a major player in Federation, to lead a temporary government into the very first election. Now with the background out of the way, let's look at the major players. First up was Barton and his Protectionist Party. The Protectionists were a party which advocated for tariffs to boost industrial development. Barton had been a major member of this party during his time in the New South Wales government. His opponent would also come from New South Wales in the form of former Premier George Reid of the Free Trade Party, who favoured open borders to spur trade with the outside world to boost Australian industry. Reid was also a bit sour that he was not appointed interim Prime Minister despite his greater political experience than that of Barton's. The other major players were the Labour parties. Yes, I said the parties, as this was the middle of the industrial labour movement and several union-backed state Labour parties began running for the Australian Parliament. In the run-up to the election, the Protectionists ran on constructing a transcontinental railway, along with standardising the different rail gauges across the country. They also wanted age pensions and to defend the Constitution from radicals, as well as the aforementioned tariffs. Meanwhile, the Free Trade Party ran most of the same things, although they wanted age pensions to be handed by the states, and of course, they wanted absolutely no tariffs. Reid himself called this election a referendum on the topic. The Labour movement, however, ran several other policies, including wanting a national army, electoral reform, and the use of government arbiters in industrial disputes, and a referendum in the case of a government deadlock. Another big issue to mention was the White Australian policy, supported by all major parties which wanted to deny immigration from non-white countries into Australia, specifically Asians. The election got underway on the 17th of January, but had to be put on hold due to the death of Queen Victoria, but got right back into it afterwards. The Protectionists found themselves having to modify their White Australia policy, as it would affect Queensland's sugar plantation importing Kanakas, Pacific Islanders who were used for what is akin to pretty much slave labour. Wonderful time, right? Free traders also had problems as their platform of no tariffs was making people worry for the security of their jobs. This resulted in the free traders modifying their policy not to remove all tariffs. Labour, meanwhile, had trouble getting support. Only union-owned newspapers would support them in the press, whereas the other two major parties were getting support from all the major newspaper companies. The election was held over 2 days, the 29th and 30th of March, and would be the only election with voting happening on a Friday, with all others being on a Saturday. South Australia and Tasmania had not yet mapped out their electorates, and instead they did a single ballot which saw the top 7 and 5 candidates of each state respectively sent to Parliament. Voting was also strange, as women could vote in South and Western Australia, but not in any other states. Also, Indigenous could theoretically vote in South Australia and Tasmania, however, few were believed to have done so. And the winner was Edmund Barton and the Protectionists, with 31 out of the 75 seats in Parliament, and 36.75% of the popular vote. He formed an alliance with the Labour Party's 14 seats and their 15.76% of the popular vote to oppose Reid's Free Trade Party and their 28 seats with 30.3% of the popular vote. There were also 2 independents who sat on the crossbench. The Free Trade Party performed best in New South Wales, while the Protectionists won in Victoria. Labour won in a few city seats but dominated in the country, which is interesting when you compare them to today's Labour. Barton's win was largely contributed to his short incumbency, which gave him the incumbent's advantage without the weight of a full term to have made mistakes. Turnout was about 60% in this election, and will be the first of many as I come back next time to talk about the election of 1903.